Hello, everyone. Wow, it's great to see everyone coming in the room. I'm just going to admit people for a minute or two, and we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. We have a full house tonight, full Zoom room. All right. Okay, well, I'll just keep an eye on who's coming in. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see everybody. And on this kind of stormy night in Evanston. Yeah, I think I got that. Well, good evening, and make sure you can hear me. I think you guys hear me. Okay, good. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Changing the Narrative, and a look at African American heritage sites in Evanston. This is Evanston History Center's second Under the Buffalo presentation for the fall 2022 season. I am Jenny Thompson, the Director of Education at the History Center. Thank you all for coming tonight. And I see from the list here that we have a lot of annual members of the History Center, which is great to see you all here. We really thank you so much for your support, because it makes programs like this one possible. So if you are not an annual member, I would really encourage you to consider joining. An annual membership provides free admission to all of our Under the Buffalo presentations and more. And I will add the link to the EHC membership sign up in the chat a little bit later. Before turning it over to our speakers, I just wanted to say a very quick word about our next program, which will also take place over Zoom on Tuesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Central. We're going to be joined by geologist and Professor Raymond Wiggers. He's been leading popular geology tours in Chicago for the past 2 decades. And he will join us to discuss his very recently published book, Chicago in Stone and Clay, a guide to the Windy City's architectural geology. And that book explores the interplay between the city's most architecturally significant sites, the materials they're made of, and the sediments and bedrock they're anchored in. One reviewer described the book, "This unique geologist's survey of Windy City neighborhoods demonstrates the fascinating and often surprising links between science, art, engineering, and urban history." So we hope you will join us for that event later this week or later this month. And more information about the event and registration can be found on our website, evanstonhistorycenter.org. And I'll also put that information in the chat. So now for the big show. We're so happy to have with us tonight our speakers, Kris Hartzell and Dino Robinson. Kris is the curator and director of visitor services at the Evanston History Center, and she is our resident expert on all things architectural. Dino is founder and executive director of the Shorefront Legacy Center, an organization in Evanston that houses more than 500 linear feet of materials illustrating the lives and experiences of Black residents on the North Shore. Kris and Dino join us tonight to talk about Shorefront's program to recognize African American heritage sites in Evanston. They'll also discuss some of the buildings and sites, as well as the processes involved in recognizing their historical significance. Now, we will have a Q&A after the presentation, and feel free to type your questions into the chat function as we go along. or you are also welcome to wait until the Q&A and use the feature to raise your hand, and you can unmute your microphone and ask the question live. So we are so excited to have Kris and Dino together to talk to us tonight. So now I turn it over to Kris and Dino.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this. As with those who are on video, if you can nod your head if you hear me properly. Wonderful. This modern technology, you never know when it goes right or wrong, so I just want to make sure. I'm going to be sharing the screen, which will have our presentation on there. Several slides that will take us through the steps of what became the Evanston African-American Heritage Sites program here in Evanston. And I'll give a little background about it as we move forward. So I'll start sharing the screen. Great. It looks like everybody can see what's going on. So thank you again. One of this inspiration behind this has been a work in progress over the last at least 20 years to get this going. And it had different iterations beforehand that did not start with Shorefront, but I was actively involved with this early process. Throughout its history, there was an organization that was organized by the then former Fifth Ward Alderman, Joseph Kent. He's actually here, like laying out some food for a presentation about the pitch program during the 1996 National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference. And there was a bus tour that went through Evanston that toured the historic African-American community. Pitch stood for Preserving Integrity Through Culture and History. And it was spearheaded by Alderman Kent, along with many community members in the city of Evanston, including former board members of the Evanston History Center, Ann Earl and Mary McWilliams, and Pauline Williams as well. And other community members as well, Pat Vance, and I'm forgetting some of the names, but there was kind of a large group. Part of the bus tour, I was one of the docents on the bus tour, and back before my locks, that's me back here in this little speck back there in the back, as I was just starting Shorefront. And the pitch committee got me involved immediately with what they were working on. The whole idea of pitch was to try and figure out how to create a conservation district in the Fifth Ward, honoring the presence of the African-American community in its multiple generations. But after a number of years of doing study, research, and putting together a report and presenting it to the Preservation Council at the City of Evanston, it kind of like stayed on the shelf there because there was some dead ends with the criteria needed to designate a preservation district or a heritage district, working with policies that don't always include more contemporary history or those who are excluded from full participation in this country. The pitch goals really focused around how do we self-define what's important to the community. And was supported by a series of newsletters to get the word out, several public meetings, and engagement with the community members to capture history, capture their backgrounds, and understand what was happening in the community. A big part of the data that was collected, primarily by Ann Earl, was going block by block, house by house, identifying the structure, who lived there, and any significance for that structure, whether it's still there or has been raised. It's extensive, and I didn't realize how extensive it was until much later in life. So as I mentioned, it kind of sat on the shelf for a while, but it started resurfacing again periodically through my development of Shorefront. The first time about 2010 when I went to the City of Evanston to propose some type of historic kiosk markers throughout the Fifth Ward. It proved to be pretty expensive and may not be ideal for some communities to have a large walk-up kiosk on their parkways near their homes. So that kind of we put a little bookmark in there and just kind of went further, started thinking about it further. The second iteration came when there was an opportunity at the time when the Family Focus building and Family Focus made the announcement that they wanted to sell their building. And the community's gut reaction was, well, what's going to happen with that building? Is Foster School, is Family Focus. It's an important landmark. It's important to us. And I remember at the town hall meeting with this, there was a lot of emotions that were carrying the weight on that. And what I wanted to do is really put some, data meat behind it. And the alderman at the time, Robin Ruth Simmons, approached me and asked if there's a way to designate this building as some type of landmark. So I went ahead and started that process of putting together a proposal to help designate the Family Focus building as a local historic landmark. It was well supported. And again, I brought in Ann Earl and Mary McWilliams to help assist me with part of the application, especially when it started talking about the architectural significance of the building. It's been around since 1905, but it had multiple renovations and additions to it, 7 to be exact. And what we were able to successfully argue was that even though the architectural structure is not, continuous in form, it did reflect the modern buildings of that time for public space and the attempt to carry over features from the earlier buildings that were there. Then secondly, I tied it to the history of people that went through that school. First as Foster School, then King Lab, and then as Family Focus. And state a case of the structure itself became historical because of the community it served, what it symbolized in the city of Evanston with racial segregation and desegregated activities, and through the people who actually went through the schools and went on to do some phenomenal things, not just locally, but on a national and sometimes global arena. And I highlighted some of those people, like those who may know, like Bill Logan, who was Evanston's first Black police officer, Bennett Johnson, some contemporaries now. If you watch this TV series called Queen Sugar, one of the actresses on there, Tina Lifford, started her acting career at the Foster School when she was attending there. And then dozens of others that I had mentioned during the presentation. I was pitted against Family Focus attorney who specialized in historic preservation. So here I am, a novice in doing this presentation, pitted against a professional. And in the end, Family Focus staff members actually sided with us and said, this is a good idea. And they eventually got on board with this whole process, and it became a designated historical site. As I mentioned, the work that Ann Earl did in identifying the buildings in the Fifth Ward, as Robin Simmons approached me again about how can we develop a preservation district in the Fifth Ward, we need to start work on that. And I said, just put a pause on that because the work has already been done. And I introduced her to both Ann Earl and Mary McWilliams. And at that time, as we set up a meeting to discuss the past efforts of pitching, where they ended with, Ann Earl donated to Shorefront all of her research in designating all of these locations. So I was able to say to Alderman Simmons at the time that the work has already been done. It's just a matter of how we arrange a historic district and what it may look like. With that, we set up a meeting with the Evanston Preservation Department and Preservation Commission. And before I even spoke, the commission suggested that we have an ad hoc committee and meet on a monthly basis to hash out what a district could look like. And we started mapping things out, looking based on work that was previously done through Pitch, work that I've done through Shorefront, and understanding that there are multiple communities throughout Evanston historically that had a relevant African-American large presence, mostly clustered in Area 1 then the immediate downtown area, Evanston, area 2, and smaller pockets like 3 and 4, 3 being closer to where the Evanston History Center is now, and 4 in South Evanston, right around Nichols Middle School. And we thought, as we were strategizing a preservation district, this was a little too broad, but what it did highlight, and what I really wanted to focus on, is that at one time in Evanston, there wasn't such thing as like a Black community or a Jewish community or a Polish community. Everyone lived everywhere in Evanston. And I think that was significant to highlight that. So we kind of took that mapping and understanding where the Fifth Ward is now, and then revisiting where all the sites are. We were trying to figure out, we don't think that having one location as a preservation district or conservation district would be ideal. And if we had to follow the national guidelines with that, the preservation district that's honoring this community may not fit accurately. So we wanted to devise our own way of doing something. And we did. And we went back to the map, designated some areas, and we said, let's make sure we do an initial spread of important sites that are important to the African American community, that are important to the Evanston's history, and showcase where they are. And then how do we do that? I mean, do we put a large kiosk in, which I knew failed last time? So I was looking for creative ways of doing something like that. In the meantime, as we were hashing out everything, the Preservation Commission started drafting a short resolution, and then later on turned it over to me to finish out the resolution. So this was the first time I ever wrote a resolution for the City of Evanston. And it turned out to be a multi-page document of a bunch of whereas, and what they wanted to showcase was the longevity of history. So most of the whereases started going back as early as possible, and pinpointing in every 10-year period a significant piece of property in Evanston throughout its history, really illustrating that there are sites all over Evanston that are worth recognizing. And you can find this resolution 54R20 on the city's website and read it for yourself there. And it designates the whereas, as well as we introduce the first 8 sites that we want to launch this program with. When we made that announcement, the media got all over it. The Evanston Roundtable, Evanston Now, the Daily Northwestern did a multiple article following of all the sites. And then we started getting calls from a variety of entities throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, including the architectural walking group. I forgot the name, it's the Chicago Architecture Tour. And they got excited about this. And that was one of the first presentations, public presentations I did on this outside of the City of Evanston, and more specifically in the Fifth Ward. At that time, I knew I had to work fast and convene a group of another ad hoc committee through Shorefront to help devise the paperwork and the criteria and how a property is nominated. And I really wanted this to be community driven. So community members can participate fully in this, finding a location that they want to nominate, basically do some research, write a history on it, and submit it through Shorefront's website. And then another committee would then review all the applications and prioritize which ones should get the nomination medal. So the site went up, and this is again with local community members. And we also contracted a local artist to help with the identity. And inspired by this whole process, instead of a large kiosk, we were looking for something that's a little more discreet, but at the same time had some permanence. And I wanted to shy away from like the standard bronze plaque that gets mounted on the building. What if the building is no longer there? Then where does it go? So we started experimenting with like different ideas, and I started combing the website on the web about what other companies were doing or entities were doing. But I remember that as I was walking one day down the sidewalk, and some of these older sidewalks have these bronze placards embedded in the concrete of the manufacturer who laid the sidewalk. And I said, that would be a cool idea to put a medallion in the sidewalk in front of the property. And that became the inspiration. And seeing what other communities have done throughout the United States, we started designing our own medallion that would go into the sidewalks. We had about 24 different designs, and we ended up with this last one over here, the heritage of the large heritage wording there. This is a screenshot of what the new website looks like as you open it up. And when you scroll down, it takes you to an interactive map where you can go to each of the sites and read up a little bit about each of its history. And I'll show the website. I'll share the website at the end of this presentation. So with that, I would like to present the initial 8 sites that we had worked on to get this program started. And the very first site that we did nominate and put on the list was the home of Elvin B. Jourdain Jr. at 2032 Darrow Avenue. Elvin Jourdain came from New Bedford, Massachusetts. After graduating from Harvard Business School, he came to Evanston to study journalism at Northwest University. But after about 3 months, he was immediately hired with some Chicago-based newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Chicago Bee, and at one time, the Chicago Whip. And at one time, he was a managing editor of the Chicago Bee newspaper in Chicago. Jourdain was instrumental in fight against city's adoption of what was called then as Jim Crow. He battled segregated practices with segregated beaches, public parks, schooling, and housing. When he ran for state, he was seated in 1931 and served for 16 years in the city of Evanston. He was also the Midwest representative of the NAACP, and not many people knew that he was also the assistant superintendent of schools in the state of Illinois, a position where he served for 2 years before he was ousted because he was fighting for equal access to education throughout the state of Illinois. Jenny, do you want to add anything to this?
I'll add something. First of all, what you've done, Dino, is so innovative, and it's really you're the cutting edge of this issue because historically the criteria for establishing historic landmarks was difficult to work with for the some of the African American sites, which does not mean that some of them, if not most of them, do have traditional value in terms of architects and settlement patterns historically. So kudos to you for putting this through. It's such and now I see it happening throughout the field nationwide. This particular house was originally just a 1.5-story bungalow and built on Darrow by a noted architect. His name was Ernest Braucher, and he did a lot of bungalows in the Chicago area. His name shows up in many historic districts for his bungalow work. This one was built in 1923 by a man named Henry Derschlag, who lived in Evanston and owned a lot of the properties. I think later he owned the property of the Butler House on Dempster quite a bit later. He subdivided this property and built these 4 bungalows. And the Jourdains lived there from about 1939 to about 1948. So all the time that he was serving as an alderman. It's been added onto subsequently. So traditionally that would have knocked it out of contention for not having the initial outline of the house, but it still has a valuable history.
And actually family members stayed in that house until early 2000s. The Elvin B. Jourdain III was still living in that house at the time. Let's see here. Here we go. The second property that we presented was the home of Lorraine Hairston Morton, who's Evanston's first African-American mayor of the city of Evanston. But she was also historically noted earlier in her career as the first African-American teacher to teach outside of Foster School, doing teaching summer school at Nichols Middle School, which she was later hired there, then later at Chute, and then later on became principal of Haven School. While she was principal there, she served as Fifth Ward Alderwoman, and then was asked to run for mayor, in which she served for 16 years. I think she was the longest serving mayor in the city of Evanston, consecutive mayor. And her life in general was phenomenal in what she's done in her thing, not just here in Evanston, but on more of a national circuit of multiple memberships that she was involved in her activity. But I remember when I started Shorefront, one of the first people that called me and invited me to her house was Lorraine Morton to give me a brush up on history to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. And when you go over to her house, it's not like a quick drop in, 20 minutes and you leave. I think I was there for about 3.5 hours. She would not let me go. Kris?
So the history of this house I thought was interesting. It was built in 1908. It was the first house on the block there just north of Simpson on Darrow. It sort of straddled two lot lines, so it sits really nicely. It has a good, generous yard around it. It was built by Bernard and Minnie Hughes, and he was a gardener. The local builder didn't have an architect, but I recently discovered that the builder, whose name was James Tate, built a lot of these houses in Evanston. He did a row of them on Ridge, just before you get to Lincoln on the east side of the street between Noyes and Ridge. You can sort of spot his houses. They're traditional 4 squares, or sometimes I like to call them prairie boxes. Because they have some elements of the prairie style, but they are in a traditional 4 square format. And of course, Lorraine's husband, James, his father bought the house in 1925. So Lorraine's husband grew up in this, or spent his teenage years and then all his adulthood in this house. And Lorraine herself lived there for almost 60 years, or if not more.
Yeah. So the current owner of the house now is the former police chief, Demetrius Cook, who bought the house after it was renovated and immediately moved in right after it was finished. I had a chance to go in there prior to the renovation and after. What Lauren had shared with me is that many of the furniture and built-ins were built by James Morton, Lauren's husband. Unfortunately, none of that was saved in the renovation. And I should have gone back to at least try and salvage something. I think the coffee table would have been wonderful. It was like kind of like imitating mid-century modern. It was more like a coffee table, like a display table with glass insets and multiple level shelves underneath the coffee table. Another entry to our the sites is the original Evanston Sanitarium before it was changed to the Butler Memorial, and then later moved to the present location of Community Hospital, which is now Old Rainbow Association. The home here, at front was the hospital, and the home behind it is where the doctors Isabella Garnett and Dr. Arthur DeLines Butler lived. The hospital opened in 1914 to service the Black community. And after Arthur Butler died in 1924, Dr. Isabella Garnett continued to run the hospital for an additional 6 years before the facility was renamed. And then with the campaign moved to its location on Brown and Simpson and Bridge Street.
This house was built about 1890 in Evanston. We didn't start issuing building permits until 1892. So if it's before then, we don't have hard documentation on it. I call it, it's a Queen Anne. It's a sort of a modified Queen Anne. It's simplified, but that big front gable and the shingles that were there originally on the top definitely mark it as a Queen Anne style, because they liked a lot of variety in their exterior of the shingles and the clapboard, and then their porches and bays. And the little house on the side, which I love, was built in 1909, and I think the Butlers built. I mean, the Dr. Butler and Isabella built it themselves for the use to expand the footprint. Yeah.
Okay. So the house is still there. It's a rental unit. So if you drive by there today, I think I took this photograph maybe about a year ago now. So the vines are still growing in front. It's owned by a property owner that does not live in Evanston. I think he lives out in the west suburb somewhere. I'm trying to locate him. I think I narrowed it down to close to the owner, but he has not responded back to me yet. Some of the locations that we're honoring are no longer in existence, but we still want to honor where these locations were. And one of them that resembles this is the 1914 Davis Street location of the Butler Livery Stable, owned by Henry Butler. This is one of several buildings he had. This was on, had the Davis Street address. It's approximately where this, what it looks like now is where this condo unit is. Next door to that, I think it's about 2 doors down is Affordable Portables. But if you look further down the slide, it's pretty much where the Butler stables were facing along, I think that's Sherman Avenue there. Then further down on Maple, there were 3 houses where extensions of the Butler business offices were located. His other office location was at his home on Dempster Street, which I'll show later. And also in his last stable location on Emerson Street, now where the condominium is across from Ebenezer AME Church.
So
what I like about this picture too, I'm sorry, one last thing. What I like about this picture, these 3 women here, I believe this was Henry Butler's business partner here. Right offhand, I just cannot remember her name. It's escaping me right now, but one of these 2 women here is the daughter of Andrew Scott, who was one of like the early residents of Evanston, whose house is on a nomination docket as being the oldest house in Evanston, probably retaining its look from when an African-American man built it. I think Andrew Scott did have that house built. But I thought these were like 2 interesting pieces of trivia about this property.
One of the things I like about this building is that this, Henry Butler took this building over, acquired this building after his initial building on 1719 Maple, which is where the Century Theaters are now. And he was having a real strong expansion in his business, and he acquired the second property. And then, of course, later he built the building on Emerson, which, as he said, was demolished. And that's such a sad story because that building on Emerson had been landmarked, and the city council withdrew the landmarking designation on it so that they could build that new building there, which goes to show you that even if you do landmark these things, it's no guarantee, which is another wonderful reason why you're putting these things in the sidewalks helps immensely. This building was built in 1886 by a guy named Leighton Turner, who was operated a livery and a business in Chicago. He came to Evanston in 1867. He was burned out in the Chicago fire, his business in Chicago, and so he expanded his livery business in Evanston with this building. And then Henry bought it. He first shows up here in 1903. I think 1901 is another date that's been shown around. And operated, continued the livery business out of the existing livery building, which I think is a great story.
That the Butler family itself is a great story of, symbolism of entrepreneurship. The families had multiple business, the extended family had multiple business ventures, including here. At 1031 Sherman Avenue. This would be about across from Nichols Middle School. And we're talking about this lot here on the Sanborn map of these multiple buildings. And the last building that exists on that lot is right here, but it's no longer there. It was torn down maybe about 2-3 years ago now. But this is where like Cornelius Butler and Barbara Butler purchased their building. They came from Kenosha, Wisconsin, selling their land and farm and bringing all their farm animals down and their business acumen to start a grocery store. Henry Butler started a delivery business. Other I call the Butler brothers had a roofing business, and others and several other businesses throughout Evanston.
One thing I thought I might add about the Butler family, because they did have a lot of properties around town, that Henry did later build a house on Brown, I think, that is still there on the other side of the canal, and that is a landmark. So hopefully that will stay for a while. And it's unfortunate that these were all demolished and we don't have more information on them.
Yeah, actually, that property is at risk now because I think the owners, the family that actually wanted to have it landmarked and fought hard to get it, now want it off the landmark status because they're having a hard time selling the building, the house as is. It's in a district where the housing prices are high, and to renovate that house for such a small footprint would not be cost effective or wise to do that. So there's some issues. That building is at risk. This property was the home of Maria and George Robinson. And what's really interesting about this property is that it's the location of Evanston's first recorded Afro-American resident, Maria Murray, before she married George Robinson. She was brought into Evanston through Allen and worked for the Allen Vane family. She was purchased out of slavery at the age of 16. I think the family moved to the East Coast for a while, and then they moved to Evanston and settled there. The Vane family, I think, had a hardware store in downtown Evanston, and Maria Murray worked as the domestic servant for that family at their house that was located around the turn S curve at Sheridan, or was that Forest and Davis Street.
Yes, these buildings, again, were built before 1892, so we don't know the original date, but it was there. It shows up on maps and in the Evanston directories in 1893. And I know that Henry Butler owned the property for a while. That family owned it starting about 1906 through at least the 30s. And at one time, I believe later, that Henry Derschlag owned it, the guy who built Jourdain's house. So he was sort of all over the place too.
And this area is really important because there was a small enclave of the Black community here. So this building, the house next door to it is also designated will be designated as a landmark. Both of these houses were instrumental in the formation of Second Baptist Church and Ebenezer AME Church here in Evanston. Around the corner was a gentleman by the name of Richard Day, who had a carpet cleaning business. And then also across the street were some other homes and residences that played a large part in Evanston's early Black community, and especially around the formation of those two churches I've mentioned. It's funny right now, the person who's renting this space out now is an architect, and he is contacting the owners of the property, trying to buy the property from those owners so he can do some renovations. So there's this little competition of the people that live there know the history of that building and they want to do something with it. So I feel confident that this property is going to be around for a while. I think from the original building, though, it has greatly been altered since then, but the footprint is still there. Yeah,
both of those houses were, the level was raised, they were bumped up, and they've had a lot of additions over time, a lot of living over the years.
William Twiggs print shop at 1619 Sherman Avenue. William Twiggs came to Evanston, I think circa about 1880, I want to say. And there's still family members, family descendants that still live here in Evanston that are related to William Twiggs. When he came to Evanston, he did go to Garrett, he attended Garrett Biblical Institute. His roommate at the time was Ebenezer AME's church first pastor. So they became good friends. William Twiggs was a Sunday school superintendent at Ebenezer AME Church. He also served as a city sealer for a little while. But with his print shop, before he started his print shop, he was a barber, and he worked for a barber shop and then owned and operated his own barber shop, and then later opened up his printing business, what's now located just north of Fountain Square in the Han building. And this is about the location where this house would have stood when it was open at the time. The two young ladies in front are William Twiggs, two of his 6 children. The oldest here was Catherine Twiggs, whose daughter was Kay Davis. Kay Davis was one of the singers for Duke Ellington. Later, William Twiggs closed this location and moved his print shop over to Emerson Street, just west of Asbury Avenue.
And I think you may have mentioned, this was his second business, because he started just south of Davis Street on the east side of Arlington, and moved into this building. And this building was early Evanston. It shows up in 1883 Sanborn maps. I think I found it in a photograph of Fountain Square from 1776 when they dedicated the fountain. You can see it up Sherman. And it probably could have easily been a residence, but it modified into a business early days. And it's interesting that it was moved where it was on Emerson, because that is right around the corner from the sanitarium, and was a traditional African-American community in that strip right there.
Yes. Then we have here the last property in this initial presentation, the original location of Ebenezer AME Church at 1813 Benson Avenue. Right now, it would have been located right around where the App Properties entrance is on Benson Avenue. The location on the Sanborn map is here. And Ebenezer AME Church is the oldest Black church in Evanston, recognized on October 30th, 1882. George Hand was his first pastor. William Twiggs was already serving as an official of that church, and it's grown since then. The building itself eventually burned down in the fire, and the congregants bought a new plot of land on Emerson Street where it exists today. That was around 1912 when they bought that property and then built up the church from there. Rumor has it is that the reason why the church burnt down, it was suspect arson. The pastor was against drinking and gambling in the city of Evanston and wanted to get rid of that riffraff. And some people did not kind of like that messaging, so they burnt down the church. That's what the street culture, the pop culture is about surrounding that church.
I'm really sorry that we don't have any photographs of this building, because I would love to see it. It was built by one of Evanston's well-known architects, Asa Lyon. He's considered the first resident architect, the first architect that lived in Evanston. He built a lot of buildings around town. A lot of them still exist, a lot of houses. There's a couple in Chicago. He had quite a name, and I love that they hired Asa Lyon to build this building for them. He did it in a traditional cruciform plan like you do for religious buildings, with the apse, with the window, which they had, I don't know if there was stained glass in it, but it would face east, so that when you're in the church on Sunday morning, you have the eastern light coming through the window behind the pulpit while the minister's giving his sermon. Unfortunately, a lot of churches burned in Evanston. The first few buildings, I mean, just about every church you can name in Evanston, you're looking at the second or third building. Like First Presbyterian Church, I remember, but finally the last one they built was stone. So unfortunately, a lot of these wooden structures did burn. I love that story that somebody didn't like what he was preaching, because this town prides itself on, we were temperance and the 4-mile limit and no alcohol officer old until 1972, which was absolutely true, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a contingent of residents. I read some article about somebody chasing the liquor inspector down the street by a mob. So there were definitely people in Evanston who didn't approve of it. And I feel like there was one other comment I wanted to make about this church, but I can't recall what it was. So I guess I'll let it go. Oh, I know that I was flipping through a bunch of 1880s newspapers looking for something in particular. And I found all these wonderful front page of the Evanston Index that the church is holding another fundraiser, another bake sale, another dance. And everybody, it sounded to me, like the whole community is involved in attending these things and helping raise money for the church.
Yes. Some other interesting areas about this neighborhood in particular, in one of these properties here, I can't remember which one, Sandy Trent lived in one of these buildings, either on either one of these sides of the church. Sandy Trent was Evanston's first African-American police officer in 1898. In addition, there was a young woman raising her family, her 3 sons, named, I think it was Carrie Crawford. She later moved to California and changed her name to her stage name of Madam Sewell T. Wan, who was a professional actress as an extra in over 100 movies. One of the first movies she was in was Birth of a Nation. And she played an active role in that film of a slave or freedwoman fighting against a white oppressor. There was a larger role, though, that showed Black bourgeois, and she was dressed up in her finest, but that scene was cut from Birth of a Nation, because it was, at the time, the message he's trying to say was different from what the film was, I think, what she was hoping it would be. One of the last roles that Madame Sewell T. Wan was in Carmen, starring Harry Belafonte and Dorothy Dandridge. She played Dorothy Dandridge's grandmother in that movie, and that was her one of 2 speaking films that she was in. The rest of the films, she had no speaking role in there. One of her sons also was a professional extra in movies, and his job basically was, anytime if you see any of those 1920s, 30s, 40s excursions in Africa, he was one of the Africans hauling equipment through the jungle. That was his job, just doing that in every movie scene, probably cut and paste in other ones, but that was a job for a lot of people, just being professional extras on movie sets. So I thought that was really interesting, that tie into something that's big right here in Evanston.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna show you a little piece of an installation of one of the markers that we did. It's about 1.5 minutes long. Might be a little bit annoying at first because the sound effects I have in there is of drilling. So please bear with me. Heritage.
That was Whip Loud design.
Yeah, that's great.
There you go.
Oh,
Nice. Heritage site number 1, commemorating Evelyn B. Jourdain Jr. So the person that was assisting me with that is the current homeowner of Alderman Odin B. Jordan Jr.'s home. And it was funny when we were drilling, there's a funny story behind the drilling part. Because the sidewalk is city property, the city can do whatever it wants with the sidewalk. But when we were drilling, she came out like, what's going on? You're in front of my house drilling, what's going on? So before all this took place, we sent out letters to the homeowners announcing the nomination and what to expect and when we're gonna come out to do drilling, everything like that, all the particulars. She told me later on, it's like, yeah, we have a pile of mail I haven't looked through in weeks, so I probably missed that. So she ran back inside, got it, read it, came back out, and was super helpful. She did do her own research on the house, so she knew a bit about the history. So she was really excited about the designation. And on the day of the unveiling, she came out to participate with that. And that was a wonderful experience with that. What we do give the owners, if they're there, we have a custom postcard that shows, you know, our marketing material, but on the back is a write-up of the designated spot, along with a specialized coin that we created as a memento, thanking them for the, you know, kind of recognize them as the new caretaker of the property. So not only is a marker there, but they have a commemorative coin that is as a keepsake for being in that property. As I mentioned earlier, Open House Chicago, we had the similar lecture on there a couple of years ago. This year, they're featuring it again as a downloadable app for your smartphones. And it will take you through a narration of what I talked about here. And it'll also show sites and an interactive map as well. So it should be up and live now. I have not looked at it yet, so I haven't, you know, I want to wait till after this presentation to play around with it. So I encourage you all to go on site and download the app and explore. And thank you very much. And I'd love to open it to questions.
That was great. Kris and Dino, excellent job as always. And yeah, let's open it for questions. Feel free if you want to raise your hand or just unmute and start talking. That's probably easier.
Yes, Mary.
Hi, I just unmuted. Hey, Dino, I'm actually the owner of the Andrew Scott house on Crane, 822 Crane. I bought it, moved in 2016, and then came up to talk to you a couple of years after that to get some more history. So did I hear you right? It's on the nomination list for the next round?
We have it on our mind to do it, but what we're hoping is that community members do it, such as yourself. If you head to our website, there is a nomination form.
Okay.
It's relatively easy to fill out. It's just a little bit of history behind it. Part of the whole process in this is building an archive, community engagement, and the realization of how important this property is. So in submitting that, then it comes to Shorefront's committee, we review it and vote on it, and then we go through the process of getting the medallion installed.
Okay, because I remember even talking to you, I don't know if it was, 4 years ago or so, like, oh, it would be so great to have some kind of recognition on the street as you're walking down, or some sort of plaque. And then I didn't realize this was actually happening. So it's terrific.
Please do it. Please do it.
I will. It's terrific. Good. So I'll mute myself. That's all.
Other questions?
I put the website address into the chat.
Well, I have a question. I wanted to ask about, you both had mentioned how this program was inspiring other communities to do similar programs. And I'm just curious about what you've seen as far as that trend. Have they gotten in touch with you? Are you kind of aware of what they're doing maybe differently or similar, or any kind of sense of it, the larger movement?
I think what I've gotten in general were comments like, this is a great idea. We need to review our community and see what we can do as well.
Mhm.
So I think for some, it may be a process where they're not as far along as we were in research. Because I'm mentioning, I mean, just the work that Ann Earl did literally saved years of research to justify anything. So that work was already done. And I'm glad that her work does not go unnoticed and that it did help this process along. So it may have been 20 years in the works and it feels like it happened really quickly, but it was a 20-year job to come to this point where we are now to amend the work that was previously done and look for new innovative ways of making it, seeing it through.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, that in all the historic preservation groups that I belong to and follow online, you know, they're all talking about how to do this. But as Dino said, it's a lot of work because a lot of these sites have been overlooked, and so they really have to reach out and do the research. And I love that Anne and Mary are in that video, Dino, because
Yeah.
yeah, they did the yeoman work on putting that all together. We all know it takes a long time. It's a lot of digging and a lot of following hunches, and
Mhm.
it is a lot of work. But
And I can tell you, and the work that she donated over to Shorefront were about 5 boxes of materials with binders, hundreds of slides. And I'm telling you, the worksheet that she had, this is dense worksheet that has like this room for a photograph, what type of architectural structure, who built it, what year, who lived in it, the footprint, the measurements. I mean, every stat you needed for that. So the work was done thoroughly. And again, this was every house, block by block, house by house throughout the 5th Ward. So I don't know if a record like that really exists like that, other than, you know, what you have at the History Center with the house files and your combined architectural blueprints are wonderful. But this just capturing this very specific area on a very specific way, I thought was just really unique.
I have a question. Hi.
Mhm.
So we live on Davis, right by Mason Park. So it's just south of the 5th Ward. And our house is from like 1890 something. I've seen different records, but we'll go with like 1896. And I think that we're the first family here who is not African American. And I'm just curious of how we can find out the history of our house.
Oh, that's a great question for the History Center, because as I mentioned, the house files is a
Yeah.
great resource to go to look at.
Come on over to the History Center and allow yourself a lot of time. And start with the building records from the city, which actually, that, speaking of Ann Earl, that was another save. I mean, they're all microfiched, but they were about to throw out the hard copies, and she brought them over here, I think about 1980. So anything before 1980, we have the paper records. It's really wonderful to hold in your hands and see, you know, the documents on the house. And then that just opens up a whole, you see names and owners and people who live there. And then you look in the directories and we in our bio files, and it's a wonderful thing to dive into. So come on over, and like I say, allow yourself plenty of time. We're open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday afternoons, and you don't need an appointment.
Thanks.
Yeah,
And once you start, you won't be able to stop.
exactly.
Yes. When I was doing the research on preserving the former Foster School, those house files had everything from the taxes on the bricks used, the footprint, sometimes the blueprints, any type of renovation that was done, the records were there. So it was very informative. I also did that with my building I'm sitting in right now on Church Street by the high school. I think they used 130,000 bricks, and there was a 0.03 cent tax on each brick used to build the house.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot of information to sift through. There's just so many rabbit holes you can go down, and it's really fun.
And I would say, just ask for the house files, and they'll start with the little postcards.
Yeah, yeah.
And the postcard will have the address and a history of all the people who lived in that address at that time.
Yeah, and then you go over to the clipping files and look all those people up. And then you go to the maps and the photographs, and
Yes.
before you know it, you know, 20
You're there
years.
all night and you're starving and you're about
Right.
to.
But Grace will leave a nice little pile of your stuff. If then you say, I'm coming back tomorrow, nobody will touch it. It'll be there the next day.
Any other questions? Well, I guess we can wrap up. We can always, you can contact us and contact Dino and Kris, email us, check out our websites, Shorefront History Center. And if you're local, please come by. And if you're not local, our archivist, Grace Lehner, also does research for people. So you can also look into it that way. But I want to thank everyone for joining us. We did record the program. So if you're wanting to see it again or whatever, we'll be sharing that later. And we just loved seeing you guys. We're hoping to see you in person at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I want to say one thing really
Yeah.
quick. I'd be remiss to say that, I can't emphasize enough. The City of Evanston was a really good partner with this as well. They were really excited about this whole program. They bent over backwards. Even the staff, the city staff will come out to do the drilling. I never knew it took like 5 staff members from the department to come out just to watch somebody drill, somebody blow, somebody to press the button on that generator, and another person to look around, bossing everybody around, and just to drill one hole. So it was kind of, but I think they got excited about the whole process and coming up with innovative ways to lay the rest of the ones that we have to do in downtown Evanston, because they're not solid sidewalks, they're pavers. And so they're talking about precasting concrete blocks with the medallion already in set, remove the paver, dig a deep enough hole, and set the whole paver down, the whole block in that section. So that's what we're working on right now to get the last 4 installed, hopefully before the winter hits.
I was going to say, we're going to post as soon as I get it to Jenny tomorrow, the link to the Open House Chicago and our Facebook page for the app. If you want to download that and do it, that'll be available.
Well, I guess we don't want to say goodbye, but
Yeah, all right. Thank
well,
you.
thank you all. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Dino. Thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you at some point soon.
Thank
Take
you
care,
all for attending.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Yeah.